Yes, this is like enough of. Then a speaker says, he's at a distance from the microphone, so it's hard to say what he's actually saying. But he shows some concern. What about this and what about that if there's an attack? And then Saddam says, I know that biological is the farthest thing away from there being a story. Now that's the literal translation. My take on it is, biological is the most attractive because it's the least likely to get pinned on us. And then he goes on to say, Wa'diyan, they ended it, their work, and referring to al-Hakam. See, they ended it, it was done. We can just say, okay, it wasn't us, look, you blew up our factory. How could poor little us do something like that? We don't have our factory anymore. And then someone goes on, it's very hard to tell what he's saying. He's away from the microphone. And Tariq Aziz says some things also. He mentions America in there, but there's just, he speaks too quickly and he's far away from the microphone, so I just had to leave it. Now, I believe there are two legitimate explanations for this. Either Saddam is referring, he's got some inside information that someone else is planning to attack us. And he's just sort of tossing that out. Or he's planning to use proxies. Given the context and other evidence of collaboration with jihadists, the use of proxies makes more sense. It makes more sense to me. If he were to have this inside knowledge of someone else, then you have to ask, well, who is it? Now, if it's terrorists, well, then he's got that much of a relationship so that they are willing to divulge their most sensitive plans to him. So there's a problem there. Everyone said, hey, there was no relationship between Saddam and the terrorists. When discussing the use of biological, refers to the U.S. Bioweapons Institute, similar to Al-Hakam. That's Fort Detrick. Now, after the anthrax letters made their way to various locations, Stephen Hatfield, temporarily a subject in the anthrax case, had previously worked at Fort Detrick. Somebody, somewhere, pointed the finger at him. And we just had Tariq Aziz saying, hey, they have biological is the best way. They have an institute, so they can, use that as the explanation for why it happened. And lo and behold, Stephen Hatfield was pinned. The man was innocent. He was never tried. And they still haven't figured out where those anthrax letters came from, or not in a legal sense at least. Now, I did this for free. I had to keep working up to a certain point, and then I just started focusing on this. I couldn't get to everything. Excuse me. The briefings on plasma, that was so important, I made time for that, and I wasn't able to correct the slide, so that's the explanation there. Now, Hosni Mubarak and King Fahd, according to Saddam, this was all a conspiracy on their part to set him up so that they have an excuse to bring in foreigners. And then he talks about getting revenge. The exact term is, they must be hit. There was an assassination attempt on Hosni Mubarak in Addis Ababa, I think it was 1995. And after that, there were various rumors circulated around that it was done at the behest of the Iraqis. Saddam also talks about planting fake documents to justify the invasion of Kuwait. And they all have a big laugh at the diversion of UNICEF and Red Cross aid to the Military Industrial Commission. That was from that early brief, 1992. Now, Jaffer continues to go on about retaining nuclear weapons personnel not already involved with projects. So he's admitting to there being projects, but we still have these other people from before. We have to keep them, we have to keep them gainfully employed. After this last briefing I gave you about the terrorism, there's another briefing where a technician from Hakam comes up and says, Mr. Leader, this is the status of our reconstruction of El Hakam. You just saw the building was destroyed. What did the Iraqis do? They get a shopping list for more incubators, fermenters, and everything else they need for a biological weapons program. Now, hundreds, if not thousands, of other tape recordings of Saddam's meetings. I do not know how many tapes are in the... All I know is that an agency sent me this, said it was unclassified. I actually thought in the beginning it had something to do with Saddam's trial. They said it's Department of Justice, they want it done. They didn't, I don't know what it is. So I'm listening, okay, this must be a hearing or something, to give background information, and it's not quite making sense with a hearing. I can't hear any cross-examination, and it was only, and the first one I did was this big, huge, long-winded conversation on how to get back into the international arena after the war, and it's at the end of this where Saddam says the mother of all battles is ongoing. So I knew this is completely different. Like I said, I think it's a very reasonable assumption that Saddam, being the megalomaniac that he was, had a librarian for all these things. So we're talking thousands. How many made their way into U.S. hands? I could not tell you. I would suggest that someone other than the FBI be in charge of exploiting this material. The reason is that people in the FBI went along with the explanation that the '93 World Trade Center attack was a legal issue and not an act of war. The Oklahoma City bombing was a legal issue and not an act of war. If my assessment is correct, there will be information in these tapes to prove that Iraq was behind those. And it does not serve the public interest for the FBI to be coming up with this information. Now, there's some general observations. Inspection programs don't work. They just don't work. John mentioned that earlier, so I won't belabor it. The UN method of crisis management doesn't work. If in 1990, Saddam Hussein goes in, takes over a country, and what did we say? Get out or we'll kick you out. Well, that's one step forward, one step back. If we had said, get out or we will remove you from power, then it's a completely different equation. You're talking to a thug, you're talking to a dictator, you're talking to a mafia boss, and it's always the first priority is maintain power, then you expand it. As it turned out, we had to do that a decade later. Just think of all the people who were killed by Saddam, all the people who suffered under the sanctions. The sanctions are horrible. That's not an enlightened way to go about things. The World War II mentality, look it, we were threatened by fascism. We went up and unconditional surrender. We ended it. There was a lot of killing, there was a lot of destruction, but right now the world has both Japan and Germany as very responsible contributors to the world. We're all better off for Japan and Germany being the way they are. If you go half measures, well, just think, if the UN program had been in place during World War II, we would have gone into France, we would have gone up to the German border and stopped. And somebody would come up, beat their chest, and say, well, we've got Hitler in his box. For all we know, Hitler and Nazism would still be alive to this day. We've got another threat right now from jihadist Islam. It's just as fascist as Nazism was, and it's that World War II mentality, as in, if we need a 5 million man army to go and completely destroy them, then that's what it's going to take. So let's get on with it. If we go that way, we'll be in good shape. If we continue to dither and worry about opinion polls in Riyadh, it could very well be that 80 years from now, our history will be written by Islamic historians who say that because of their wickedness and their decadence, God ordained that we should overrun the United States. I am so serious. And right now, I think I'm acting and I'm speaking as though we've already been nuked and we've lost 40 million people. They're going to do it. So let's just make up our minds. We're going to defeat them and do it. Saddam waged a war against us while we litigated a legal process against him. And with that, I end this presentation.